$50,000 to $100,000.
Oh my. You're kidding.
No, do you still think it's ugly?
Yes. Excuse me. How much?
$50,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
$20,000 to $30,000. So we have a
Well,
how collectible.
hallelujah. It was worth the trip. It was so nice meeting you, Peter.
What if an old teapot sitting on a shelf for decades turned out to be worth more than a luxury car? And what if the most valuable silver treasures on Antiques Roadshow looked like nothing more than forgotten household pieces? Welcome to our channel. Today, we're counting down the most expensive silver treasures ever appraised on Antiques Roadshow, where ordinary tea sets, cups, trays, and decorative pieces became hidden fortunes through remarkable craftsmanship, maker's marks, and history. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible hidden treasure stories.
Well, it's an Asian figure that was my grandmother's. She acquired it probably sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was given to her by a beau who traveled to Asia extensively and brought her back many objects, and this was one of them. And she displayed it prominently in her home, and then when she passed, my mother had it, and it was prominently displayed in her home, and now I have it. I'm assuming it's brass, but I don't know what it represents. I really know very little about it.
Some objects stay inside a family for so long that everyone becomes familiar with them without ever knowing the real story hidden behind them. This statue had been passed down through 3 generations in exactly that way. To the family, it was simply an old Asian figure that the owner's grandmother received many years ago. A family keepsake displayed in the home, but no one really knew what it represented, when it was created, or what kind of value it might have. Even the owner believed it could just be a brass figure. But when the expert began examining it, the story quickly changed. This was not an ordinary piece of brass. It was a Chinese gilt bronze Bodhisattva. The first detail that caught the expert's attention was the surface. The golden appearance was not the result of modern polishing. It was the original gilding that had survived for hundreds of years. But the true value was not only in the gold surface. The figure represented the Bodhisattva of compassion, an important symbol in Buddhist art. The arms surrounding the body were not just decorative details. They carried a deeper meaning, representing the ability to guide and help beings in many different ways. And the detail that made this discovery even more surprising was its age. This was not a souvenir purchased during a trip. The expert identified the figure as a piece from around the 17th century, dating close to 1650. That meant before it ever became a decoration inside this family's home, it had already survived through hundreds of years of history. For works like this, age is only part of the value. The craftsmanship matters just as much. From the expression of the face, the jewelry details, the lines of the clothing, to the way the hands were formed, every small element revealed the skill of the artist behind it. Even though the statue was missing its original lotus base, a detail that could have greatly increased its value, what remained was still enough to prove this was far more than a simple decorative object. A figure that had been misunderstood for years was actually preserving a story from nearly 4 centuries ago.
Speaking to value in a retail setting, this would be $40,000.
Wow. Had no idea. Absolutely no idea. That is fabulous.
If this did have the original double lotus base, it would probably have a value of about $150,000.
Harry Bertoia made those pins, and I think they were some of the very first that he made. My sister worked in the dorms where he stayed at Cranbrook. He gave her one, and then he knew that she had 2 sisters, so 3 of us got the brooches, and I have those too.
Do you remember about what year this was that you received them?
Oh dear, I must have been in my teens. I bet it must have been about 16 years old.
Okay.
Late 30s, I would say so.
Some objects are so small that it is easy to overlook the much bigger story hidden inside them. For years, these silver brooches were not treated like important works of art. They were simply family pieces that had been kept over time, and at one point, the owner even considered selling them as ordinary pieces of silver. But their real value was never about the amount of silver they contained. It was about the person who created them, Harry Bertoia. Today, Bertoia is recognized as one of the influential names in 20th century modern design. But before becoming known for his metal sculptures and furniture designs, he began with something much smaller. During the late 1930s, while he was at Cranbrook Academy of Art, Bertoia was still experimenting and developing his own creative style. The brooches he made during this period were not mass-produced accessories. They were miniature works of art, and these silver brooches came from that important early chapter. Every detail was handmade. The curved metal lines, the way each part was connected, and the abstract forms all revealed ideas that Bertoia would continue exploring later in his larger works. In many ways, these small pieces of jewelry were the early traces of an artistic language that was just beginning to take shape. But what made them even more special was not only the design, it was the story behind them. Many of Bertoia's early jewelry pieces were unsigned, making their origins extremely difficult to identify. But in this case, the owner had a direct connection to Cranbrook and to Harry Bertoia himself. He personally created these brooches and gave them to the family. Later, Bertoia's career moved into other creative fields, making these early jewelry pieces a small but important part of his artistic journey. The brooches that had been kept quietly for years turned out to capture the moment when a major artist was beginning to discover his own style.
If these were to come up in an auction house that has maybe modernist furniture, Bertoia's sculpture, these as an addition to a Bertoia collection, each of these pieces alone would bring somewhere between $20,000 to $30,000. So we have a total of $40,000 to $60,000 as an auction estimate.
It's come down mother to daughter since it was made. My aunt gave it to me because she didn't have a daughter.
Well, it was made in the 18th century on Long Island by Elias Pelletreau, who was a Huguenot silversmith who was working in the middle of the 18th century, right through the Revolutionary period.
Some antiques become special because they manage to survive for hundreds of years, but there are certain objects that carry something even more unusual. They survive while staying connected to the same story from the very beginning. This silver teapot was never a forgotten piece discovered in an antique store or an object that changed owners through different auctions. Since the moment it was made, it had remained inside one family, passed from mother to daughter through generation after generation. For the family, it was a tradition that had continued for centuries. But when the expert examined it, the story became much bigger than a family heirloom. This was a piece of American silver history dating back to the 18th century. The teapot was created around 1760 to 1765 by Elias Pelletreau, a Long Island silversmith who worked during the colonial period and continued through the years of the American Revolution. During that time, a silver teapot was far more than a simple household object. Tea was still considered valuable, and owning a piece like this represented the taste, status, and social position of the family who used it. But what makes the timing even more interesting is what happened shortly after it was created. America was entering a period of dramatic change. The growing conflict with Britain, the Boston Tea Party, and eventually the Revolutionary War transformed the meaning of tea in American society. So this teapot was not just a reflection of 18th century craftsmanship. It was an object created right before a turning point in history. And the most remarkable detail was that its own story could still be traced. The initials engraved on the teapot connected it back to David and Phoebe Mulford, ancestors of the current owner's family. After more than 250 years, the connection between the object and the people who first owned it had never disappeared. For collectors, that kind of provenance is extremely difficult to find because the value is no longer only about age, silver, or the maker. It is about an object that has carried its own history through every generation.
And I would say at the moment this is worth somewhere in the region of $20,000 probably.
That's nice to know.
Mm-hmm. But obviously worth far more to you as a piece of family.
I'm not about to let it go. I have a daughter who has two daughters herself, so we'll see if we'll go down that way.
The market value could be measured in tens of thousands of dollars, but the story preserved inside it was something much harder to replace. A teapot once used in the 18th century had become more than a piece of silver. It became a record of American history and the generations of one family who kept that history alive.
Well, my husband and I were on vacation in London. We're art collectors. We happened to walk into an auction house. We saw this piece, and realized that it was coming up for auction the next day. We came back, we bid on it, and we were lucky enough to get it.
Sometimes, the most fascinating discoveries do not come after years of searching. They begin with a completely unexpected moment. During a trip to London, this couple walked into an auction house with no plan of finding a hidden treasure. They noticed this antique clock, discovered it was going up for auction the very next day, and decided to come back and take a chance. At that moment, they only knew one thing. They loved the way it looked. But what they did not realize was that behind its unusual design was a piece created during a time when clocks were not made only to tell time. They were symbols of engineering, artistry, and status. As soon as the expert examined it, several details revealed that this was not just another decorative clock. The first clue was hidden in the winding mechanism, a feature connected to 18th century clockmaking before later movements changed the way these pieces were designed. But the detail that truly made it stand out was the orbit mechanism. Instead of a traditional clock face with hands, this clock uses rotating rings to display the time, turning the entire object into a small mechanical performance. In the 18th century, high-end French clocks existed somewhere between science and art. The movement inside represented precision, while the exterior was crafted almost like a luxury sculpture. The ormolu gilding and individually cast metal details that were carefully assembled together showed just how much skill went into creating this piece. But the detail that could completely change its value was not even part of the clock itself. The owner revealed that she still had a pair of matching candelabra at home. And that opened up another possibility. This may have originally been a complete garniture set with the clock as the centerpiece and two matching candle holders on each side. After hundreds of years, many sets like this have been separated, sold individually, or lost. So if those matching pieces were still original, an already valuable clock could become the kind of complete collection that serious collectors hope to find.
I feel that the clock alone is worth in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 if it was just the clock. I believe that if you had the candelabra with it and they were authentic to the piece, that would at least double the value. I think it would be fair to say that they would run over $60,000 if they're as in good condition as this is and as fine.
Got it from my uncle's aunt. She lived in Chicago. That's about all I know about it.
Well, you know a little more. You know who made it.
Yeah, it's on the bottom.
Yes, and what does it say?
Tiffany and Company.
And what else does it say?
Sterling silver and the letter.
Sometimes, an object can stay inside a family for years, while even the person who owns it has no idea what story it is actually carrying. This vase was exactly one of those cases. There was no collection record, no detailed history attached to it. All the owner really knew was that it once belonged to a relative who lived in Chicago. And at first glance, even the owner herself was not completely impressed by its elaborate appearance. But one tiny detail on the bottom immediately caught the expert's attention. The words, Tiffany and Company. However, the surprising part was that even the Tiffany name was only the beginning of the story. After examining the silver marks, the expert realized that this vase was created during the period when Charles Louis Tiffany was still leading the company, a time when Tiffany was trying to prove that American craftsmanship could stand beside the greatest artistic centers of Europe. And this was not an ordinary sterling silver vase. The detailed enamel work, American turquoise, and carefully designed decorations showed that this was not something made for mass production. It was created as a showcase piece, a way to display the highest level of skill a craftsman could achieve. But the real turning point came when the expert connected the owner's family history with the history of the vase itself. Her relative had lived in Chicago, near the location of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, one of the most important international exhibitions of its time. At events like this, major companies did not simply display ordinary products. They brought their finest creations to demonstrate their design, innovation, and craftsmanship. But one question remained. Was this vase only made during the same period as the World's Fair? Or was it actually connected to the exhibition itself? The answer was hidden in a tiny mark underneath. A globe symbol combined with Tiffany's T marked the signature used for pieces connected to the exhibition. That one small detail completely changed the story. The vase that the owner once thought was not even attractive turned out to be a piece connected to an important moment in Tiffany's history. Its value was no longer about the weight of the silver. It was about the maker, the craftsmanship, and the century-old story hidden inside it.
But with all the enameling and everything else, an auction value on this piece in today's market, which is a little conservative, I would say $50,000 to $100,000.
Oh my. You're kidding.
No, do you still think it's ugly?
Yes. Excuse me. How much?
$50,000 to $100,000.
Okay.
I remember as a child, I would go to my grandfather's house. This was something that was always sort of proudly displayed in the living room. His dad had passed it to him, and then it passed to my dad and passed to me.
Are you a Baltimore family?
I'm a Baltimore family,
Okay.
correct.
Well, this is fabulous Baltimore silver. So we have a teapot, a coffee pot, and a covered sugar.
Some objects stay in a family for so long that they become part of its memories. Everyone knows they are important, but not everyone knows the real story they have been carrying. For the owner of this silver tea set, it was not an expensive antique locked away for protection. It was something he remembered seeing as a child, proudly displayed in his grandfather's living room. Through the generations, the silver set was passed from his great-grandfather to his grandfather to his father, and eventually to him. But what the family had preserved was not just an old silver set. It was a piece of American silver history from more than 200 years ago. When the expert examined it, he identified it as Baltimore silver, created by Charles Louis Boehme, a silversmith working during the early 19th century. At that time, silver coffee and tea services were not simply objects used to serve drinks. They represented status, refinement, and the social position of the people who owned them. A large silver service displayed in a home was a way for a family to show its taste and success. But what made this set special was not only its size. It was also the period and design behind it. Created during the Federal period, the set reflected the influence of European neoclassical design, focusing on balance, elegance, and carefully controlled details. Instead of relying on excessive decoration, its value came from proportion, craftsmanship, and the subtle quality of every line. The engraved details and family monogram also showed that it once belonged to a specific family, helping preserve the story behind the piece. For collectors, antique silver is not judged only by the amount of metal it contains. What matters more is who made it, when it was created, and the journey it has survived. After more than 2 centuries, many silver services have been separated, lost, or disappeared completely. But this Charles Louis Boehme set remained together and continued passing through generations of the same family.
The scale is fabulous and a maker that is very desirable. And for insurance purposes, I would look at a figure at around $30,000.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you think it's something that can actually be used? Can it be used with coffee and tea in it?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure.
They were my great-grandfathers. So my great-grandfather grew up in the same village as Josef Hoffmann in Czechoslovakia, and then they both moved to Vienna, and then my great-grandfather wanted to support him in his designs, and so he acquired these.
Some objects are purchased because people already know they will become valuable. But sometimes, a hidden treasure begins with something much simpler. A small act of support for someone pursuing an idea, and that was how these 2 silver cups entered this family's story. The owner's great-grandfather grew up in the same village as Josef Hoffmann. Later, when both of them moved to Vienna and Hoffmann began building his career as a designer, he purchased these pieces simply to support someone he knew. But what he could not have realized was that he was not just buying a few silver objects. He was preserving a small part of a movement that would change the history of modern design. Josef Hoffmann was originally trained as an architect, but he believed that art should not exist only in large buildings. A chair, a cup, or even an everyday object could become a work of art if it was designed with the same level of care. That idea helped shape the Wiener Werkstatt, a group of artists and craftsmen in Vienna who wanted to remove the boundary between fine art and everyday objects. And these silver cups came from one of the most important periods of that movement. At first glance, they may appear very simple, but that simplicity is exactly what makes them special. The hand-hammered surface preserves the marks of the crafting process on the metal, reflecting Hoffmann's design philosophy. Beauty did not need to come from excessive decoration. It could come from shape, proportion, and the honesty of the material itself. But the detail that truly changed their value was hidden underneath. Josef Hoffmann's signature, the Wiener Werkstatt mark, and the craftsman's mark confirmed their origin. To collectors, these were not just two silver cups. They were pieces connected to a specific period, a design movement, and one of the most influential figures of the 20th century. Something originally purchased to support a friend had accidentally preserved a piece of Vienna modernism history.
This is the high point of design in the early part of the 20th century, and Hoffmann was the master of design. I think a retail replacement value for them would be in the $30,000 to $50,000 range.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Wow, I had no idea. Holy cow.
For a number of years, my parents collected jewelry from the Southwest. And these are two Charles Loloma pieces that I believe they got in the early 70s through the Heard Museum.
What do you think those cost back then?
And we actually have the receipts. So that it was under $200 per piece.
Some objects become valuable because they are made from precious materials. But sometimes, the thing that completely changes an object's story is not the silver, the stones, or what it is made from. It is the person behind it. When the owner's parents bought these two bracelets in the early 1970s, they simply saw them as beautiful pieces of Southwest jewelry. Each one cost less than $200, and no one could have known that decades later, the name connected to them would be what collectors cared about most: Charles Loloma. In the world of Native American jewelry, Loloma was not just another craftsman. He was someone who changed the way people viewed this entire art form. Instead of seeing jewelry only as traditional handmade objects, Loloma transformed bracelets, rings, and pendants into wearable works of art pieces where technique, culture, and personal creativity came together. And these two bracelets came from an especially important moment: the period when Loloma was still developing his own artistic identity before becoming an icon. They were created using tufa casting, a technique that uses soft sandstone as a mold. The artist carves the design directly into the stone before pouring molten silver inside to create the final piece. Because of this handmade process, every creation carries something unique. The lines, textures, and surfaces all preserve traces of the person who made them. But the design was only part of the story. These bracelets were also signed by Loloma and came with clear provenance from the Heard Museum, an important institution connected to Native American art. For collectors, this combination changes everything. It is not just a beautiful piece of jewelry. It is a work with a documented history, created during a defining period in the career of an influential artist. So even though the owner already believed they had increased in value over the years, the real number was still something she never expected.
I would venture to say that in today's market, this bracelet alone, probably in the retail marketplace, about $25,000.
Whoa. Can I sit down? Only kidding. Wow.
Yeah. This bracelet,
wow,
maybe a little more. Like, why? Because people like turquoise. And look at that great penetration through the stone. The fact that it goes all the way through and you can see right through it. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable. And it's just a really great example of his restraint and creativity. $28,000.
What they could not have known was that they were preserving pieces from the moment a major artist was beginning to create his legacy. A choice made from personal appreciation eventually became a part of the history of modern Native American jewelry.
I actually inherited them almost 20 years ago. It was on my mother's side. They got to my mother from her uncle Robert, and then before Robert, it was with George. So from what I understand, these spoons were part of a story time. So for instance, Uncle Bob would, sit all the kids down and he would display the spoons. He said that they were Revere spoons, as in Paul Revere.
Some objects are passed down because they are known to be valuable, but others survive through generations because of a story the family never wanted to forget. For this family, 6 small silver spoons did not begin as a treasure carefully protected behind glass. They were part of family story time, brought out as older generations told the children that these were Revere spoons. For years, it was simply a story passed down. A famous name, an old family object. But after more than 2 centuries, was that story actually true? The answer only appeared when the expert examined the tiny marks left on the silver. The maker's mark on the spoons confirmed a very important name, Paul Revere Jr. Today, many people remember Paul Revere because of his role in the American Revolution. But before becoming a historical figure, he was also one of the most important silversmiths working in Boston during the 18th century. At that time, silver pieces like these were not just everyday objects used at the dining table. They represented the skill of the craftsman, the status of the owner, and the period of history in which they were created. But these spoons carried another clue: the initials AA. Engraved on the silver could be connected to Anna Amory, a member of a prominent Boston family, and a name linked to records of Revere's silver work. That meant these spoons were not only marked by a famous silversmith, they could also carry a connection to their original ownership from more than 200 years ago. For collectors, details like this can change everything. An antique silver piece already has value, but a complete set of 6, still kept together, carrying the maker's mark and a story that can possibly be traced back through history that belongs to a completely different level. After generations of being preserved, what this family had kept was not just a group of silver spoons. It was a small piece of early American silversmithing history.
Were these to come up in an auction of like property and well publicized, we'd expect them to carry an auction estimate of $20,000 to $30,000.
Wow, really?
If you were to want to have these insured, you'd probably be looking at a value closer to about $50,000 for the set of 6.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
These spoons were not just believed to be connected to Revere. They actually carried the mark of one of the most important figures in American silver history.
Brought in part of a tea set, which I inherited. My mother passed away in 2006, so I've had them for the last 12 years. My father purchased it at auction in San Francisco around 1961 or 62. The one story that I gathered from speaking with my sister is that my dad picked this up, brought it home, and my mom was furious with him for spending the money on something non-essential.
Some objects are once seen as unnecessary purchases, but many years later, those same objects reveal that someone may have noticed something valuable that everyone else missed. When the owner's father bought this silver tea set at an auction in San Francisco in the early 1960s, the first reaction in the family was not excitement. His mother was actually upset because she believed the money had been spent on something they did not really need. But the piece that once caused disagreement remained in the family for decades. And the real story only began when the expert examined the small marks underneath. Those marks revealed that this was not an ordinary silver set, but a piece of Japanese silver craftsmanship made by Konoike. That origin brought the story back to the Meiji period, a time when Japan expanded its connections with the world and its craftsmen began introducing their skills to an international audience. During this era, many pieces were not created only to be used. They were created to demonstrate the highest levels of craftsmanship. And this coffee pot and teapot showed that through every detail. At first glance, the shape may look familiar to Western eyes, but the decoration carries a distinctly Japanese identity. The dragons were not simply placed on the surface. The artist transformed them into part of the entire design, from the lines wrapping around the body, to the handle, to the feeling of movement throughout the piece. Combined with the hammered finish on the surface, every detail showed that this was not a mass-produced object, but the work of a highly skilled craftsman. But what made this story even more interesting was that these two pieces were only part of the original set. The family still had many other pieces from the tea service. After more than 100 years, when many silver sets have been separated or lost, having a large set survive together can make a significant difference.
This tea and coffee service is quite rare. They're in really good condition. The two objects you've brought here today, I would insure them together for $30,000.
Okay. Wow. That's a lot considering what else is still unreviewed. All right. I better get them insured.
Just the two pieces brought in were worth tens of thousands of dollars, while the rest of the collection had not even been examined yet. A random decision at an auction ended up preserving a piece of Japanese craftsmanship more than 100 years old. And sometimes, the things one generation sees as unnecessary become the treasures that the next generation is lucky enough to inherit.
I paid $35 for it. I bought it at a garage sale for Children's Hospital in Buffalo in 1992, the week before my wedding, when I had hardly any money. I was just broke the week before the wedding, and then my luck changed, so it's sort of the magic of life, you know?
But what the owner did not realize at that moment was that the silver cup she decided to take home was hiding a story that had started more than 2 centuries earlier. The real clue was not obvious at first glance. It was hidden in the tiny marks left on the silver. To most people, these markings might look like simple symbols engraved into an old object. But in the world of antique silver, hallmarks can act almost like a historical record. They can reveal where a piece was made, when it was created, the silver standard it met, and most importantly, the person behind its creation. When the expert decoded these marks, the cup was identified as George III silver from the early 19th century, and the maker behind it was William Bateman. The Bateman family was one of the well-known names in London silversmithing, connected to the tradition of English silver craftsmanship during the Georgian period. At that time, silver objects were not valued only because of the material itself. A goblet, a tea set, or a piece made for the dining table represented craftsmanship, personal taste, and the status of the people who owned it. But what makes Georgian silver interesting to collectors today is not simply the fact that it is made from silver. The real value comes from the combination of age, maker, design, and the ability to trace its history. A silver cup without any information behind it could easily be seen as just another old object. But when those tiny marks connect it to a recognized maker and a specific moment in history, the entire story changes. After more than 200 years, not every piece of Georgian silver has survived. Many were lost, damaged, or even melted down when people saw only the value of the metal and not the history behind it. But this cup still preserved the details needed to tell its story. Something that once sat among ordinary secondhand items turned out to be a surviving piece of English silver craftsmanship.
I wouldn't be surprised if someone paid anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 at auction.
Oh my gosh, that much? No, really? Oh. Whoa, well, a lot more than I thought.
We're scrambling to the ATM for.
Yeah, really.
A decision that seemed completely ordinary ended up becoming a discovery the owner never expected. But the most surprising part was not only the difference between the original price and its true value. It was the fact that an object so easily overlooked had managed to preserve the mark of its maker and the history of the time it came from. Sometimes, hidden treasures are not found in the most obvious places. They can be sitting among the most ordinary objects, waiting for someone to finally uncover the much bigger story they have been carrying.
These have come down through my family. They belong to my grandparents. I just remember them being on a dining room table in New Orleans after my mother passed and we were dividing stuff up. My sisters didn't want them.
Some objects are forgotten not because they have no value, but because after many years, no one truly knows what they are anymore. For this family, these 2 silver pieces were simply familiar objects that once sat on their grandparents' dining room table in New Orleans. When the family possessions were eventually divided, the others did not choose them, and that was the reason they remained in the family. But what was almost overlooked was not just a pair of decorative silver objects. They were connected to one of the most important periods in the history of British silver craftsmanship, the Victorian era. When the expert examined them, the small London hallmarks from the 19th century quickly revealed the first clues marks that could identify where a piece was made, when it was created, and the story it carried. The silver tureen was made in 1841 and reflected the Rococo revival style, with flowing curves, shell-like patterns, and elaborate decoration that represented the luxury of that period. But it was not only created to impress guests at the dining table. The engraved symbols, including the family coat of arms, suggested that it may have been connected to an important event, possibly a wedding gift for its original owners. The second piece, the Ewer, was created more than 40 years later in 1883 and represented a completely different style. Instead of the softness of Rococo design, it carried stronger Gothic revival influences. The satyr handle and real silver coins added to the body showed that this was not just an ordinary mass-produced object. And that was what made this pair so interesting. They were not simply 2 pieces made from silver. They represented 2 different moments of the Victorian period, when styles, craftsmanship, and artistic tastes were constantly changing. For years, they were just familiar family objects. But the hallmarks, craftsmanship, and hidden details revealed that they were still preserving a piece of British silver history.
I would say that for insurance purposes, the Tureen should be valued at $20,000.
Pleasantly surprised.
The Ewer, $10,000 insurance for that.
All right. I may just have to hang on to them.
But the most remarkable part was not just the appraisal number. It was the details left behind by the silversmith more than a century ago. Something that had once been a familiar part of a family dining room was actually preserving the craftsmanship, status, and style of an entire era.
50 years ago, my husband's favorite aunt gave us this sugar bowl for a wedding gift. She put a little note in it and said that it was a piece of family silver, and she said she has not been able to decipher the coat of arms, and she said some people think that the top is not original to the bowl.
But what the family did not know was that the most important secret was not hidden in the undeciphered coat of arms. It was hidden in a tiny mark that could have easily been overlooked. When the expert examined the maker's mark, the entire story behind this silver sugar bowl began to change. The name revealed was Paul Revere Jr. Today, many people remember Revere as an important figure in the American Revolution. But before becoming a historical icon, he was already one of the most significant silversmiths working in 18th century Boston. And that discovery transformed this bowl from a family piece of silver into an object connected to the history of American colonial craftsmanship. During that period, items made for tea service were far more than ordinary household objects. Sugar and tea were valuable commodities, often associated with families of wealth and social standing. A custom-made silver sugar bowl was not only a practical item, it reflected the taste, status, and identity of the people who owned it. However, in the world of antiques, a famous name alone is never the whole story. Experts also look closely at the shape, proportions, and craftsmanship to understand whether every detail matches the history behind the object. This pear-shaped sugar bowl shared many characteristics with documented pieces from Revere's workshop, helping confirm its historical importance. But after more than 2 centuries, there was still one detail that made the story more complicated: the lid. Although it matched the overall appearance of the piece, it was not the original lid created with the bowl in the 18th century. For collectors, a detail like this can make a major difference, because originality is one of the most important factors in determining value. But even without that original piece, the most important elements had survived the maker's mark, the historic form, and the journey preserved through generations.
They looked at it and they said, well, if the top is original, it's probably worth $12,000 to $15,000.
Well, the good news is that silver of the colonial period is highly sought after, and while the top being a replacement does affect the value tremendously, it's still quite a valuable piece of silver. I would place an auction estimate of $10,000 to $20,000 on it. If the top was original, the one that sold in 2010 brought $58,000.
Oh my word.